Hey guys. All right, so short video today. Really, I just want to go over the peer review. I want to sort of use it for two things. Number one, I want to make sure you guys understand what it is I'm asking you to do in the peer review. But number two, I've written this one in particular, although I do try to do this with all of them. I've written this peer review in particular to try to help you guys focus on sort of the biggest problems I normally see in these papers when you guys are sort of wrapping them up. So let's get into it. To begin with, have they, and then this is your peer, right? Have they provided context to understand whatever argument they're making about their primary text? So to return to our previous video, that stuff gets jumbled in my head sometimes. I believe our previous video was a student writing about Lori Loughlin, that whole business with bribing officials and other folks that wear suits to work to get her daughter into USC, right? And that story broke, and people were rightfully upset with Loughlin and all that stuff. What I just gave you mostly is enough context to understand the primary text. Now, of course, I kind of did that off the top of my head. It was sort of an outline, right? But if I were writing that paper, that would pretty much be my outline for introducing the primary text. I would need a couple more specifics, but the length of what I just gave you there was pretty close to right. I mean, to put it another way, you will almost certainly need a little, not much, but a little more room than you normally would to introduce your primary text in this paper. If you think about our other papers, we say 2-3 sentences, something like that. Here it may be like 4 or 5, somewhere in that ballpark. If you go way over that, which some of you have done in your previous drafts, you got to cut that stuff down. That's because that's not our main. That's not our job, right? We're using the primary text to make an argument, so you need context, you need some of that information, but you really got to pick and choose. We only need as much information as we need to understand what you're talking about, but we're not writing a report on, for instance, Lori Loughlin in this case. What do you think needs to be added or taken away? Added is pretty easy. That's just, I don't quite understand this, so help. Taken away, for Lori Loughlin, it's plenty in that paper to talk about her. If, and the student did not do this, but if that student ended up going down a rabbit hole about Lori Loughlin's daughter, Olivia Jade, and talking about all that stuff, we don't have enough room in this paper to talk about both of those people, right? So one of them would have to be eliminated. And that would be up to your peer, but that would be a comment worth making. Hey, you're taking all this time to talk about both of these people. You got to pick one of these, and kind of go from there. Number 2, does your peer actually have an argument that addresses the prompt and avoids the pitfalls we've outlined this semester? Primarily, not just this semester, but in this past unit, some of the pitfalls for this paper, people will want to do really 2 things that they shouldn't. Number 1, they'll want to build their paper around an argument as to whether or not this person should have been canceled or what should have happened with a given event, whatever it is. That's not what we're here to do. And again, you I hope heard me say should. We want to avoid those statements. They suppose a hypothetical world where something else has happened other than what actually happened. That's not what we're doing. Sometimes really screwed up things occur, or other times maybe you agree with what happened, and that's great, and we should do those things. But that's not what we're here to do. We're here to talk about what has actually happened and do our best to propose theories, hypotheses, as to why that's the case. Why we, as a people, society, a culture, react the way that we do, for lack of a better description. Other pitfalls, you guys are still really, and again, it happens, you're really given a summary. Bear in mind, again, we need context for whatever person or situation you're talking about, but most of your writing, like context is quick, is small, okay? Most of your writing should be, here's what this means. I'm gonna dig into specific details from my evidence, whatever it might be, to then talk about some argument I'm making, some claim I'm forming in this particular body paragraph. And we went over that in actually quite a lot of detail in the past couple videos. But I know, for instance, we touched upon it in our last one. Again, dealing with Lori Loughlin and sort of how people reacted to that. Number 3, is your peer avoiding summary? Well, I just kind of talked about that. Sorry about that. In their body paragraphs, sticking almost exclusively to analysis. I guess I give this its own question because you guys really struggle with this one. Sometimes really struggle with it on the last paper. I'm not quite sure why. I mean, I have theories, but mainly, again, you can have a little bit of context, a little more than usual in your introduction. Apart from that, your body paragraph should feel about the same as we've done all semester. If, to play devil's advocate for a moment, you find yourselves sort of requiring a bunch of background information in a particular body paragraph, that means one of two things. Either maybe you haven't provided enough or the right kind of context in your introduction. Maybe you need to include some of the information that's in your body paragraph in your introduction instead. Or you're doing the thing where you kind of just write your way to your evidence, which happens when you draft, right? I know we've talked about this before. That happens. But when it comes to editing your stuff before you turn it in, you want to look for these moments. Like, I thought at the top of this body paragraph, I was going to write about this thing. This was my main idea. That's how our brains work. And you just worked with it down the page, and then you had to work with it for a while, and you ended up getting somewhere related but different. Well, what that means is this is what you actually wanted to talk about. And a lot of the stuff that came before can just be cut. We don't need it. We thought we were going to say one thing. Turns out we're going to say another. That's fine. Get to that thing quicker. Cut that fluff out. It's going to give you more room for analysis. I know you guys hate losing length. I know some of you just will not cut anything. But I'm telling you, length does not matter as much as actually having analysis. And you're robbing yourselves of opportunities for that with the filler. So, all right, number 4. Any details your peer might dig into, especially when it comes to their evidence, have they glossed over anything that's worth further consideration? So, again, I know, for instance, there might be a cat in here. Story of my life. Sorry. I know, for instance, we touched on this specifically in the last video. It was something about, it was the Lori Loughlin paper, and it was something about somebody sent a tweet, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but it's like, you know, how typical a rich white person doesn't have to pay the price for their crimes. The tweet was shorter than that, but that was the gist of it. And part of what I pointed out in the previous video is our student is fine bringing up that tweet, like fine quoting it, because that's an interesting response to what happened. But they don't really deal with any of the details, right? So for instance, saying that the rich person gets off for doing what she did, which, by the way, kind of requires you to be rich in the first place to do it, right? Is fine, although maybe even a little bit redundant, because it's like, yeah, we know she's rich. That's part of her crime, is like no poor people are bribing people to, you see what I'm saying? Anyway, we could talk about that. But the most interesting element, again, that kind of, gets addressed but doesn't really get dug into enough, because we go down the Black Lives Matter route, the fact that she's white. Like, it's just interesting. And again, I mean that sincerely. It's interesting that that's the response to the I was gonna say controversy, but like it's only controversial if there's two sides. It's really not a controversy in this case. It's she's a lady that did a thing she shouldn't have. But again, it's interesting that that's a response, and the fact that it's interesting means we can now talk about it. We can dig into, as the peer review questions state, what it might say about us as a people, a society, a culture, that pretty much immediately we sort of offer claims like these, hypotheses. I don't know why I can't say that word today. Hypotheses like these, with little to no information. And point of fact, Lori Loughlin went to jail. So now I'm like, well, the whole pay the price business, like, didn't she? Anyway, any and all of those questions come to bear as soon as you actually dig into specific elements from your evidence. Oftentimes this is language, especially if you're quoting. I want to remind you here one more good time. We quote for language, not for information. So if you were providing a quotation just so I have the information from it, well, then that's not worth quoting. Now, of course, if you quote, chances are good there's something in there worth digging into. Maybe try that. Look to the language. Look to anything that stands out as potentially significant, and think about what you might have to say about it. Number 5. Are the topic sentences arguments that are worth proving? Do they sum up the body paragraph? So this is a two-parter. Number 1, and this can be hard sometimes for you guys, but the best way I know to talk about it, isn't an argument that's worth proving. Is it banal or not? Is it something that we all kind of know already? And again, that can be a hard line to nail. But if it's super understood, if it's just not, I mean, I don't know. Something you guys probably hear a lot, like teenagers are on their phones too much. I just don't. It's true, by the way. It's true. I'm on my phone too much. I'm not a teenager, but I'm on my phone too much. Everybody is. The reason that's banal, other than it being super true, is it's pretty vague. Like, it's pretty general. It's hard to disprove a statement like that. And even if you could, who cares? Like, the applicability is so wide that it just... And the reason that doesn't work for our purposes, and for you in particular, is because you have to do no work to prove it. Everyone just kind of shrugs and says, yeah, sure. And then you have no work. You have no analysis. The trick there, usually, is to get more specific. So, rather than everybody's on their phone too much, which again, is true. Why might that be? And again, the example I'm using may not come into play in some of your papers. I mean, everybody's paper is different. But if you wrote a paper where that point was maybe worth making, chances are very good some element of your argument ties into it, so you can get more specific. Everybody's on their phones too much these days because what? Like, that next step is going to make you get more specific, and it's probably going to make your statement much less banal. People are on their phones way too much because boredom is the epidemic we don't talk about as a society. That I completely pulled that out of my ass. I don't know. I don't mind it. But now all of a sudden, some of you may agree with that statement, some of you may disagree. Now there's at least a little bit of traction to that statement. And it's something, and I don't know if I believe it, by the way, but it's something I would have to, in my paper, try to prove now. It requires work. When we say it's worth proving, another way to think about that is it requires work, explanation. That's your analysis. I know I'm belaboring this. Last thing I'll say, if you feel like you have nothing to say about a particular element of your paper, a lot of the time it's because you're trying to prove a banal claim. So you actually do have nothing to say, because there is nothing to say. So watch for that. The other parts of this question, do they sum up the argument in their body paragraph? The best way I know to think about this, there's a couple strategies. Number 1, again, bear in mind, we all kind of draft this way. You start a paragraph, most of the time you don't really know what you want to say. That's totally normal. But you kind of figure it out. If you write enough, you do figure something out. What that means, though, is how you started your paragraph is often different from how you end it. So you got to go back to the top of that body paragraph. You got to change it. Where did I end up? Holy shit! I didn't talk about this at all. A lot of the time, I'm reading your papers, guys, and your first sentence or two, it's almost like it's from another paper, right? It has nothing to do with what you're talking about. And again, that happens, but you can see it too. I know you can. So go look for that stuff. Go look for those moments where I thought I was going to do one thing, turns out I had a whole other idea clanging around in my head. Okay, make that change. It's usually rather easy to do. Another thing you can look for, most of the time, if you're going to make an argument, it's in the bottom third of your body paragraph. Again, just the way that we draft, the way that our brains work. I think there's a cat in that closet. Anyway, the way that our brains work, I'm gonna have to check now. All right, it's even worse than that. I'm just hearing scratching for no reason, so that's terrifying. The way that our brains work, you will build an argument, you will figure it out as you go, and that means there in the bottom third of that paragraph, that's where it's going to show up. You can look for it there, do your best to identify it, and if you can find it, well, now that means I need to make sure whatever that argument is, that's what my first sentence on this paragraph is. If it's not, which oftentimes that's the case, you need to change that, and you can. All of a sudden, you have a real topic sentence. That's kind of it. Honestly, in 1101, that's a bit of a game changer, so I would give it a shot. The only other things I want to make sure we have on our radar, next time, we're going to talk about the presentation. I know some people freak out about that, but especially in the context of an online class, it's pretty low stakes, it's pretty low pressure. I'll get into more of it then. I don't want you worrying about it right now, okay? I want you worrying about the paper. I just want it on your radar. We're going to talk about it next time. Also, your final draft, so this paper is due on the 8th. Today is the, I don't even know, 4th, something like that. It's this Friday, the 8th is. So we have some time. We're going to talk about it a little bit next time as well. And yeah, that's what we got going on. Otherwise, I hope everyone's doing all right. My son is home on spring break, and I'm very surprised he has not kicked down that door yet. And that's all I got. So take it easy. Thanks.